I believe that haptic content creation is a brave new world that we really need to be focusing a lot of attention on moving forward to have relevance for the field. I'm not saying we have to stop everything else, but this is something we actually have to add to what we're thinking about. So I'm going to give just a tiny bit more introduction to myself because I think it's relevant to the message I want to give. So I've been at UBC in a computer science department since 2000. I've never taken a computer science course in my life, and I thought they were joking when they asked me to interview. They call me an HCI person there, okay? But my history is all over the place. As you can see, I started out pre-med, I was in biology, I was going to be a veterinarian, true story. I changed my mind at the last minute. And then I worked in biomechanics and then robotics. I was doing controls, still doing hardcore, this is MIT mechanical engineering, it was hardcore engineering. I am an engineer, I identify as an engineer. Okay, and then I gradually moved farther out and I went to a Silicon Valley think tank where I met a much broader range of people and started thinking about problems in different ways. I was introduced to the concept of human-computer interaction and user-centered design and thought about applications in a way that felt very intuitive and natural to me. The point in this is to actually say that I live in both worlds. I think about human-computer interaction, but I also am an engineer and I build stuff. And so I hope that gives me some credibility that I'm interested in both mechanical and interaction design. And I think that the sweet spot is where they come together. And I don't think they're coming together yet. So here's the core premise. We've been working on this stuff for almost 30 years now. Okay, and so technology is starting to get really interesting. We're seeing it in products. Over the last 5 years, it's quite a bit more people in the world know the word haptics than was true 10 years ago, or certainly 20 years ago. But actually, it's very hard to use as a design medium. And there's been focus on bringing the technology into displays that you could put into commercial products, and then it stops there. No one knows how to contentize it. And contentizing the haptics is really hard. Okay? Designing with haptics is different than designing sound or images, or even designing physical shapes, like industrial designers do. And so I present to you a grand challenge of design tools. And before you can make design tools, you have to think about what hapticians actually do so that you can support them with tools. Okay? And what are causing the problems? Okay, so that's what I'm going to try and talk about. So, you think, what's a haptician? Haptician is a term that my former PhD student Oliver Schneider coined, and I have tried to use it whenever I can because I think it's very helpful. By haptician, I mean anyone who designs haptics. That could be an engineer, it could be a user experience designer, or it could be a novice or an expert. And so let's think about this. If you're a designer, you're a haptician of any ilk, okay? Who are you? You have some primary disciplines. What is your background? What do you know? Are you novice, expert, and in which of them? Like you might be expert at one and novice at another, and we can include domain knowledge of an application in that as well. Okay, what are you making? Are you making haptic technology, haptics content, or are you designing the entire end-user experience? So if you're a psychophysicist and you're trying to understand how people perceive something, for example, we're talking about edges or something like that, okay, I would say that that's somewhere in between, somewhere in this mix of haptic content and end-user experience, but it's not a whole interaction. It's a piece that needs to go into a whole interaction. Okay, who is it for? Is it for broad categories of people, for example, a consumer product that millions of people might use? Is it for specialists? For example, surgery, a surgeon using a laparoscopic application. Or is it for me? I'm actually customizing something that I'm going to use. I'm actually designing something for myself, which, by the way, is a huge growing category of application. What design stage are you at? Are you generating concepts for the application? Are you in user testing and refining? Or are you at field testing? The kind of tool you need is going to be very different for those different design stages. Okay, and who else is involved? Who's your design group? Is it no one because you're doing this entirely on your own? Do you have all kinds of collaborators? Boss, client, people that you have to show your ideas to. And of course, this is very hard to do with haptics because you can't just show people a picture of it. You know, the representation thing is a massive problem, as you guys all know very well. So I've just colored in some areas that my lab has worked on, okay, where we've tried to support with tools or studying people in these different parts. And you can see that there's some coverage, there's some gaps, and even where there's coverage, what I really mean by that is that we've taken a stab at it. We've done something in that area. We have not solved it by any means. Okay, so start by looking at process. I feel like I want to look at my slides, not over my shoulder here. So am I too far over? So can I stand here?
I think the camera can still see it.
I can see over it, so I can peek at my slides here. Okay, so we actually, one of the things I've never done is actually worked in a real bona fide company. I've worked in companies, but not as a haptics person. Okay, so, but I have worked alongside companies as opposed to in it. And then something else we've done is to carefully go into a lot of companies and study the designers working in those companies as a research topic. And so the design framework I'm offering right now is a result of actually studying haptic designers within the companies. This was done with Oliver Schneider. And so, and Colin Swin was before him. So here's some things that we do. And this is, these tasks are things that user experience designers do in other kinds of UX design, not just haptics. Okay, but I want to talk about how doing these things is different for haptics than it is in other areas. And so here you are, you want to make an application. Maybe your application is you're going to make your smartwatch do something. Buzz informatively at an opportune time to give you information. Okay? And so one thing you might do is browse to look at examples. What has other people done? What knowledge is out there already about the problem I want to solve? You might be browsing technology, you might be browsing stimuli, you might be browsing applications. Okay? You want to look at what you're starting from. Then you need to create. At some point you have to start. You have to figure out what is the concept here. You will have to refine that concept. You will have to make it better. And then you will need to share in some way. And you won't necessarily do these things in this order. They'll go back and forth in a complicated cycle. This is, who's familiar with the design funnel, often attributed to Bill Buxton? A few people. Okay, so the basic idea here is that as you progress through a design, you start with lots of ideas, and then you narrow down and you lower risk. Okay, so while you do lots of sketches, you ideate like crazy, they should be low cost, throwaway prototypes. And then as you iterate, you lower risk by, you increase your investment, but you reduce the number of ideas, and you trust them more because you've tried them out. Okay? So all kinds of things have to be true for this to work, right? You have to be able to actually sketch. You have to be able to make lots of examples, and then you need to be able to have ways of refining and diminishing them. So clearly tools are going to be important for carrying this out. And I've just highlighted those 4 activities that we identified as being really important by professional designers, where they actually show up in this ecosystem. So there could be all kinds of iterations. So sketching and refining is a kind of a spectrum. You might fit into the design process this way, and sharing and browsing is something that you're doing all the time as you iterate. Okay, so let's start with browsing. So here's one problem with browsing. It's certainly not the only one, but it's one we can talk about. So we don't have a tactile design language that we can use. In fact, we don't have representations for much of anything. And so here's an example of how that plays out. So we have a buzzing phone, okay, an application we see a lot. People are saying, we have a tactile display possibility in some mobile device. What should it do so that people can actually make sense out of it and it's useful for them? And you have the designer, okay, and he's thinking of things like, we call these machine parameters. Okay, I think everyone in the room can relate to these terms. This is how you create the sensations, it's how they're described, it's what makes sense to us. Then we have the end user, and he's thinking different terms, okay? So there's a bit of a gap here, that if this guy's trying to design for this guy, and they don't have the same language, and how do you actually translate into something that's going to be useful? This is his cognitive framework, okay? This person is not designing in this person's cognitive framework, and that's not going to go well. So here's some work that was done with, well, this picture is from a joint publication that Haptic Sci-Fi's, Oliver Schneider and I did together. This particular cognitive framework idea came from Haptic's work. And so this idea of cognitive frameworks, there's different ways that people look at, this was done in the context of vibrotactile sensations. I think some or most of this framework might apply to other kinds of concepts, other kinds of haptic sensations. But they might perceive them as physical structure, sensory attributes, and emotional connotations. You might use emotional language. We have actually found this is an incredibly important one that people tend to use emotional words to describe haptic sensations. They might make metaphorical associations or give usage examples. I would use it for this. I would use this to signal that my wife has sent me a message. Okay? And if you understand that these are people's cognitive frameworks, then you can try and design applications that way, but how do you do that? So what Haptic did was to design a browser. So she made a huge, over the years, we've accumulated huge libraries of haptic sensations that are physically, that people can tell apart from each other, but we don't really know how they mentally organize them. Or we know how they mentally organize them in perceptual ways, but we hadn't dug into the other ways that people might mentally organize them. So Haptic looked at all the other ways besides perceptual that people might organize them, codified that, and actually put it into an online browser. And I'm going to say right now that for interest of time, I'm going to tease you with a bunch of tools that I'm not going to show to you and go into, because like this is a video clip, but if I picked all the video clips, I'd be here for an hour. So I encourage you to look it up online. Some of you have seen ViViz before, but this was using visualization skills, visualization techniques to have multiple windows into a collection, where each different window is connected. And if I touch something here, it highlights it over here, because it's the same set, but you're looking at it in different ways. And this lets you navigate a collection in a particular way. But let me be clear, this is a browser. That's all it is. It's just a browser. It doesn't let you modify or edit. Haptic went on to find ways to modify and edit and mix and combine in perceptually relevant ways. I'm not going to talk about those, but we looked at those steps too. This is a browser. Okay? So, and there's a video that I won't show you. Okay, let's move on to creating. So, a big takeaway that I want to make in this talk for this audience is that it's not enough to say you could use this technology and this and that and the other application. You actually have to think about what haptics will do in that application, and you have to try it, because your ideas of what it would be good for very likely will be wrong. And I'm speaking from having done this myself over and over, including very recently, when I was sure that I had a killer app for a particular technology, if you want to use that word, and when I actually tried to do it, we realized all these holes, all these problems, all these reasons that the technology was not going to be suitable, at least the way I had envisioned it would be. Okay, so you actually have to try it out. So the other thing, remember, most haptic applications will be multimodal. They're not going to be just haptic, they're going to work with other stuff. You have to think about what's the context, how do the senses work together, what would the experience of using it actually be like, and when you try that out, you might be surprised. Okay, so this is from this book chapter that I wrote with Hasti and Oliver, and it's just trying to outline if you start thinking about picture of haptics as like it's a theater, it's a dramatic production, and there's this cast of players, and there's vision, and there's audition, the sounds and the imagery, and there's the plot, and what is actually trying to happen. What is the part that haptics is going to play in that production, in that theater production? Okay? Is it going to be primary? Is it going to be leading actor? Is it going to be playing backup? Is it going to be the secondary thing? Is it going to reinforce? Is it going to be complementary? Okay? Is it going to show you the same information as the graphics does, or is it going to show you something entirely different? All right? Is it going to be the first thing you get? Is it going to be the alert? Is it going to be the follow-up? Like a lot of times what happens is you get haptics as the alert, but it's not very informative. It just tells you, hey, something. And then if you want to actually see what the something was, you go and follow up in a sense that has different strengths. Okay? And you have to figure all this out and actually go through a checklist perhaps and see if you're actually handling all this. And if you do this, you have a much larger design space. Okay, so here's an example from that book chapter. There's way too many words, I don't expect you to read this. But the main point here is that there's scenarios. And these are one frame out of the storyboard that actually tells the story. And a comic strip is a great way to do this, to say what happens when. In each case, we're saying, what is the haptic goal? Well, is it to notify and guide? Is it complementary? And it's the initial thing. Versus you can analyze your scenarios this way and actually get clear in your mind about how the team is working together in an application. Okay? So, and then once you've developed a scenario, you actually be able to try it out. You're drawing a comic strip about it is one thing. And how many of you guys have ever supervised an undergraduate student team who are doing some kind of project? They're doing an application, and I got this idea. It's like I just saw it happen again with a team that wanted to do the World Haptics Design Challenge, the Student Innovation Challenge for this coming year. And they developed a concept, and they brought it to me, and I had to go over them and say, well, actually, the haptics won't do that. Like, you have an idea of what it's for, but this undergrad team didn't actually understand the capabilities and limitation of the technology and their idea wouldn't work, okay, because they didn't, it's like the point that Ron was making earlier. They don't understand the technology well enough. Okay, so you need to have a purpose. How does it work? Can your technology actually deliver on the concept? Will it actually do the thing? So we can talk about the edges on surface haptics, which was a discussion this morning. Another one is sometimes novices in particular don't understand that hand-mounted haptic display, this is the issue for the Student Innovation Challenge, cannot actually give you grounded force feedback, and if you try to punch a wall with it, your hand will keep on going right through the wall. And they didn't understand that because they didn't really understand the concept of grounded force feedback. So they figured it out when they actually, I made them actually act it out, okay, and think about what was going on. Okay, lots of sketches, minimal effort. You need to have lots of forms, so many forms that your sketches can take. Without such tools, there's big barriers to exploring alternative ideas and failing fast, figuring out quickly what works and what doesn't work, and finding the good ideas and proceeding with them. Okay, and now teaser. Here's a bunch of work that we've done. We built lots of different prototyping systems to try and fill in some of these gaps, trying to solve the sketching problem. So this was for, I won't show you the video, but this is for sketching behavior in physical robots. How should it move? We developed design systems so you could rapidly prototype lots of different form factors, and at the same time have encoding tools so you could change the behavior at the same time you're modifying the bodies. We put a lot of effort into making a system that we could iterate very quickly on, because that was what was needed. And then Voodle is using voice input to quickly prototype emotional behaviors. You can do it for tactile sensations, you could also do it for robot behaviors. It's actually very entertaining. I'm going to show it to you. What might a detailed design tool look like? So now you have a sketch, you've decided this is the best, most promising approach to take. How are you going to refine it? You're probably going to need different tools for this. Okay, when you're sketching, you're usually, it's like pen and paper. You're doing it once, and you throw it away. But if you actually want to take that idea and go back and edit it and make it better and do it again, you might need different representations to work with. Your database might need to be different. You need to transform it. So sharing is also part of it. To be able to refine, you're probably going to need to get feedback from other people, all kinds of people. And so you need to have it in a form that different people can look at it. So just one example of the many tools we've worked on in this area was Karon. This was Oliver Schneider's work. So we needed to, he actually built an editing tool. We've built many editing tools over the years. This one was made for the purpose of research. We wanted to study designers and study the concept of sharing examples. And also developed a way of putting it out online and doing crowdsourcing of feedback, which is very hard to do with haptics because everyone doesn't have the hardware. We're using graphical and auditory representations of haptic stimuli, and we did a big study where we compared people feeling the real thing in the lab with people using crowdsourced versions of it to see if we could get the same kinds of feedback and actually direct design with the same result as if you did it in the lab. So again, I won't show you the tool. The point is partly what the editing tool can do, which is less new and exciting. We've done that before. But the way that this one was used to study the way people used examples and incorporated examples into their design process, and that they would design differently if they had examples and if they didn't. Okay? So I've said hapticians have lots of dimensions, all these ways, and I said that we've touched on a lot of them. So I'm now going to segue into some current work. And so some of the places that we're working hard right now in our lab, oh, you can't see that very well, can you? Novice, that says novice, is I'm trying to highlight. Okay, so we're starting to look at novice designers as being very interesting. That says, that was haptic technology. I have to work on my color coding here. And then this one was domain experts, actually studying domain experts. So we're kind of looking at different roles in the haptic design and seeing how that changes what people do. And so one project, which actually Guggen Park has been part of the team on this one, it's a collaboration between UBC and Max Planck, led by Hasti Saifi, who went there to work on her PhD, or postdoc. And in this case, we're actually looking at the technology side. And this time I am going to show you the video. This was just going to appear at Chi this year. Let's see if I have, uh-oh, wait. My sound is not turned on. Okay, I didn't turn on the sound, so let me walk you through this. So what's going on here is we're trying the idea of vibe-viz, but for haptic devices. So we have a database which basically has just about all the haptic devices, I wouldn't say that have ever been invented, but a very, very good representative set. And then using this idea of different facets to let you navigate and browse the library in different ways. What's triggered this idea was the concern that people, especially younger designers, don't have access to the full history of what's actually been invented so far. But even if you did, it would be hard to find stuff because you don't, it's this whole cognitive framework, what are you looking for? And in particularly, we wanted to do this bridge between engineers who think about the technology in one way, and between user experience designers who will be thinking about it in another way. So it's just like that earlier picture of are you thinking about it in machine parameters and degrees of freedom and impedance, or are you thinking about it from the UX standpoint of the experience that it can actually create? And we thought that by showing both views and allowing access to both views in the same tool, they would help these different groups appreciate the possibilities from different sides and actually change practice in the field. And so this is some of the ways that we hope that Hapticpedia might actually change design practice in both of those communities. To bridge engineers and user experience designers by providing a common language, to encourage the development of standards for how you report things, and Gunya can speak to this after having gone through 105 papers, well, more than that, trying to actually categorize and pull out all from the metadata of the paper and actually explain what all these devices are. I don't know if you saw, but there's actually 3D animations of how the devices move in there, which Farama, one of our team members, actually implemented for a whole bunch of the things in there. And so actually the devices are described in different ways and to different degrees of, it's a good test if you describe your device well enough as if can we actually capture it in Hapticpedia, because a lot of them aren't. All right, and then accelerate development, because you can actually start from what we already know rather than reinventing the wheel, and change community practice in a measurable way. So we're actually doing the benchmarking right now, and we hope in 5 years we can look out there and say that people are actually doing something different, and we do have that ambition. So that's Hapticpedia. This kind of thing is important for a vibrant design ecosystem. It can't just be the technology design. Okay, another thing we're working on is studying novice design practice. Who is at 2017 World Haptics? Raise your hand. A few of you were there. Okay, who knew that there was a student innovation challenge there? Does anyone remember what it was? Sorry?
Was that
No, it was not Mid-Air Haptics. I forget which year that was.
Happy for students?
Sorry?
Happy?
That was the hardware. We gave Happily and HapKit to student teams. So two self-fabricated, they were 3D printed, very low-cost haptic devices. And the student challenge was actually to come up with a science lesson, education design challenge. So, but it wasn't just an innovation challenge, it was actually a research project because we were studying them. So we invited student teams to build a haptic experience and using hardware that we provided to them, and then we studied them during their design process, and then we studied the judges and to assess design outcomes. Okay, how good was their design, basically. And then we did a major qualitative analysis on a huge amount of data that we collected from all of this, and we're just about to publish it or submit it for publication. Trying to figure out what the best place to submit it actually is, because it's a qualitative study about novice haptic designers, and go figure that one out. It's a little bit tricky where you put that. Okay, so the idea here is that this gave us a huge insight into what novices actually need. And you can think about, well, why study novices, not experts, if experts don't have the tools? Here's the thing, is that experts need very specialized tools usually, because they're working on specialized problems. And there won't be a one-size-fits-all tool. Novices, like this situation, you can actually get some general insights by looking at a more general problem and see where people are starting from, and then use that to leverage better design tools that can work better for everyone. And there's similar analogies I could make for computer science. For people learning computer programming, we often start with a basic programming language to get the ideas of computational thinking across, and then go into more specialized and diverse things, so we can actually learn a lot about what is the best way to design by looking at novices. Okay, and these are people are novices in both the technical skills and also haptic technical skills. They might be very good engineers, certainly, and novices in user-centered design. I can tell you they made some very predictable mistakes. Systematic review of haptic application design. So I have a, oops, something was missing here. A not so secret suspicion that people in the different communities take a different approach to application design. Maybe you could shoot me down on this, but we're supposed to be a little bit controversial here. The people in the haptics communities tend to be great on the technology, fabulous on the technology, and then somewhat cursory on the application design. And I would actually not call what a lot of people call application design. I would not give that name to it myself. Whereas people in the HCI community may look very deeply into the application and the user support and less deeply into the technology or use other people's technology. And I will warn you right now that this is changing. There's some very, very sophisticated technology that is being invented by the HCI community these days at the technical end of the scale. And this community is in danger of being made irrelevant, okay, because we're not doing it both. Okay, you get left behind. And so we're actually wanted to back that up and see if there was evidence for this by doing a systematic review of the literature and actually looking at how people describe the detail with which to describe and what the design outcomes are for their application design in the two communities. And then a final one is we've done this work with affective robots in therapeutic environments, and we've reached the limit of what we can do in the lab, and we're looking at long-term case study relationships. First one is with the Dementia Center, another one was with palliative care with kids who have terminal diagnoses and their families, and also with babies in the premature ward. We have technology that is helping the baby but displaces the mom and damages the mother's relationship with her baby. So how do you design that technology so it works? So those are three places we're working in a long-term relationship with staff and caregivers and patients. The point here is we're going deep to try and understand the technology that's going to work in those environments. So we're back to our design funnel. Summary, design tools and examples of design are needed to make haptic content design more accessible, rapid, and successful. Tools have to be designed with specific design intent. They have to interoperate so you can move the design forward through the process and not have to start from scratch at every design stage. They need to support collaboration. They need to recognize that novices are a really important set of design groups because we're all novices in something in this interdisciplinary field. They need to be extendable and portable and be supported by a wealth of examples and data sets, and they need to work in the real world. And we're working on this. It's not supposed to be just my group's tools. We want to make something that's going to be a center for other people to put their tools and start to support a mindset of design practice that's actually going to be helpful. And I will stop there. A bunch of people have